Let me conclude with some remarks about the electric vehicle industry, and here I'm drawing on a report that was done with my colleagues on the staff and Nick, as well as a group of experts around the country. First point we make in this report, it's very important to understand, is that electric vehicles are, of course, not new. In the 1920s, we sold more of them in the United States than we did gasoline-powered cars. We now have, of course, two very prominent ones being introduced into the marketplace. These are, of course, extremely different vehicles because the Volt still has a gasoline engine and accomplishes roughly the same range as a gasoline-powered vehicle has, whereas you have much bigger risk with the Leaf because you've got basically only a battery to operate this vehicle. Now, I won't give you the details on the economics since you'll be discussing them throughout the afternoon. But the good news is you have electricity that's anywhere from 60 to 80% less expensive on a per mile basis than the gasoline. And that's even without accounting for possible substantial increases. If you look out into the future, most people are projecting oil prices to rise faster than electricity prices, so this advantage is only going to grow. One qualification, fuel taxes. These electric vehicle owners aren't paying as their user obligation for their gasoline taxes, and sooner or later someone's going to go around and say, hey, you electric vehicle owners, you got to pay for the roads like everybody else. How this exactly will happen, whether it be a mileage tax or something, but it will happen over time, and it will narrow this difference a bit, but still there'll be a substantial advantage in the operating cost of the vehicle. Domestic energy source, and you've heard these other advantages. On the bad news side, you heard Charles talk about that upfront $10,000 to $20,000. Who's really going to pay this? Is the government going to pay it for you? And how long are people going to tolerate, taxpayers in this fiscal environment, giving people who make more than $100,000 a year a $7,500 tax credit to buy these vehicles? I submit to you that is not a very sustainable public policy. Watch it over the next couple of years and see whether it can survive as we move forward. Now, I think that the real political angle of this issue, which is important, I want to conclude by emphasizing this, is really what you have going on right now globally is a competition over who is going to secure the future of the manufacturing industry, the whole supply chain that underpins the auto industry. You have the U.S. industry and the foreign transplants, who of course have a big stake in gasoline-powered internal combustion engine, and they have a big stake in hybrid technology, particularly the Japanese manufacturers, Toyota and Honda. You have the German manufacturers who are very big in diesel technology, Volkswagen all around the world, and they would like to expand that diesel technology. And then you have, of course, who's going to emerge as the winner of electric vehicle technology. As a result, politicians are getting into the act, and they're trying to tweak, with partnerships with industry, the policies to give these technologies a boost. So for electric vehicles, the most unusual feature of U.S. policy is not the $7,500 tax credit. A lot of countries around the world have something similar. It's not subsidies and R&D for new battery technology. A lot of countries have that. The most distinctive feature is the California zero emission regulation. If you want to do business around here, you've got to have at least a limited number of zero emission vehicles. That is a very distinctive feature of U.S. policy. The European Union is more complicated. If you look at it EU-wide, the story is they want carbon emissions control, and they're not going to specify to manufacturers which technologies are going to be chosen. Economists love this technology-neutral approach, letting the marketplace fight it out and decide which technology is going to win. However, when you go to the member state level, you can leave Brussels and go to Paris, you get a different answer. And in Paris, they have big subsidies for plants and for consumers to move in the direction of electric vehicles. In contrast, in Germany, you have very elaborate eco-mobility plans with large reports being issued. But when you look at the bottom line in terms of actual subsidies to the consumer or to the manufacturer, very little going on in Germany. Although that's being debated right now, and it's possible that will shift. There are good reasons for this difference. I can't describe to you just right off the bat the German electricity sector, but you already know what the French electricity sector is like, having heard from Charles, and you have these nuclear power plants all around this state. So the French have this vision of linking their nuclear power industry to an electric vehicle industry with French manufacturers of these vehicles, That is a very promising technology, not only for France, they have in their eyes the whole European Union market as a potential for this approach. Another thing about Europe to keep in mind about why it would be a particularly attractive place to introduce these electric vehicles is the fuel prices in cities, whether it be in Norway or Denmark or Germany or London. They are way above the kind of fuel prices that we're used to in the United States or that the Chinese are used to. And as a consequence, if you're an early entrant in this industry, you might think about these European cities as being a particularly attractive place to introduce this first round of electric vehicles. Now, the Chinese are very interesting, and I'll try to build on some of Charles' comments here. So here you have a country that desperately wants to have its own motor vehicle manufacturing industry. They don't want to rely on partnerships with General Motors or Volkswagen. They want to have their own homegrown Chinese manufacturers. Well, how are they going to do that? They're way behind in internal combustion engine technology, gasoline engines or diesel engines. I mean, there's no way they're going to compete with the Germans or the Japanese, or it's going to take a long time for them to compete. But they see electric vehicle industry as a way to level the playing field. Since we're at the early stage of this industry, if they can buy into some of the key intellectual property, or some would say steal it, this initial intellectual property, they can get in early and build an electric vehicle industry, and then not only supply China with its growing vehicle needs, but then have an industry that will export into Japan, into the United States. Imagine that vision coming from these central economic planners in China, and that's exactly the kind of thinking that's going on right now. So you have, for example, a rapidly developing public policy in China toward electric vehicles. It started at these 5 cities with the green star on the coast in China. It's now up to 25 cities where consumers in these cities who buy an electric vehicle get a big equivalent to, as Charles said, at least as generous as the U.S., maybe more generous when you adjust for GDP, incentive to buy these electric vehicles. And you also have concerted efforts around the development of infrastructure, recharging stations, public recharging stations in a variety of these cities. One of the concerns in the U.S. right now is we've taken a modest amount of money for recharging infrastructure. We sprinkled it around the country through the so-called stimulus package. But do we have enough money in any single cities to actually create enough to actually build a serious transportation sector based on electricity? The Chinese, in part because of their political system, they basically said, these are the cities, we're going to have enough infrastructure in these cities, we're going to subsidize the cars in these cities, and as a consequence, they have the ability to move more aggressively and break through a lot of the industrial barriers that we have in the U.S. That's not to advocate that approach to governance, but it's just to give you a clear sense of the nature of the global competitor we have in front of us when China decides that it really wants to do an electric vehicle industry. I don't want to de-emphasize the role of South Korea or India or Japan. They all have serious roles in the glowing competition. The details of this are in our IU report on the future of the electric vehicle industry, which is available out on the table out in front. So, concluding thoughts. Number one, it is an exciting time in the car industry. It is a revolution is occurring with a lot of competition and a lot of fascinating ideas, both within the electric vehicle industry and competition to electric vehicles as a solution to the problems we've talked about. One thing I think I really want to emphasize is the consumer is going to play a very powerful role. And if you think consumers are either going to sacrifice horsepower or pay $10,000 to $20,000 more, or they are going to reduce the size of their vehicle, you may think that will be a good thing for them to do. But in the United States, at least, I don't think we have much evidence to believe that's going to happen. And in China, you're seeing in their growing middle class very similar sorts of tastes of Americans as they really like these German premium cars that are being sold into China. That's the world we're looking at in the future. So, bottom line, if you could tell me where oil prices are going to be over the next 20 years, I could tell you a lot more about what's going to happen to the electric vehicle industry. But we all know how difficult that projection is. Thank you very much for your time and your patience, and I look forward to further conversations.